I'm going to do a few videos. So this swatch was done using the wrap and turn method, both in this section and in this section, but this top one I used a slightly different way of resolving the wraps. I think it actually looks just a little bit neater there than it does here, so I think it is worth taking a little bit of time to resolve them slightly differently, and I think it looks a little bit better on the back as well. So with wrap and turn, you actually can see the, I'll just lift that a little bit closer, you can see here the wrap. So the main goal is to hide it from the right side, so you can still see it slightly from the wrong side, but if that was, say, a jumper, well, you're never going to see that. And then this is it with a variation. It's slightly better hidden than, say, here. So this was one without the variation picking up the wrap, and this is one with the variation. So I'll show both methods. So I've cast on 28 stitches and done 4 rows of garter stitch just to stop it rolling. So I've knit 23 stitches, and we'll knit one more, that's 24. So here's where I want to do my wrap and turn. And it involves moving this stitch to the right needle, wrapping it, and then moving it back. So I'm going to move the stitch, slip the stitch purlwise, which means not changing the orientation. So I insert the right needle as if I'm going to purl it. And then I bring the yarn forward and then move the stitch back, and I'm going to turn my work. So I haven't knit these last 3 stitches, or including this 4th one. I haven't knit these 4 stitches, but this 4th last one has been wrapped, and then the yarn's going to end up going to the other side anyway because I'm going to be purling. So I've moved the stitch, moved the yarn, moved the stitch back, moved the yarn back, and then now I'm going to purl until 4 stitches from the end, so that would be purling 20. The thing you want to be careful of is you actually don't want this wrap to be too large, because when you So I've purled until 4 stitches from the end, and I'm going to do the same thing as before. I'm going to slip this stitch purlwise, move the yarn to the other side, so from front to back, slip the stitch back purlwise, and then move the yarn back and turn my work because I'm going to knit. And you can see that this stitch has a wrap around it. It's like a little necklace around the top of it. And I'm going to knit a stitch and then snug it up a little bit so that the wrap's not too large. And then I'll knit until 8 stitches from the end. So now I've knit until 8 stitches from the end, which is also 4 stitches from the last wrap stitch. You can see that that was the wrapped stitch on the knit side. So there's 1, 2, 3, that's the wrapped one, and then I've knit 4 before that. sometimes patterns will tell you to knit until 4 stitches before the last wrap stitch, so you don't count that one. Knit and 4 clear stitches before it, and then I'm going to wrap this one. So I move the stitch, move the yarn, move the stitch, and I can either turn and then move the yarn, or I can move the yarn and then turn. The yarn has to be on this side anyway for purling. So you can see that wrap is really quite large, so I do really want to pull that a little bit in a little bit. But I'll snug it up again before I go to purl the next stitch. And then now I'll purl until 8 stitches before the end. So now I'm 8 stitches before the end. So this was the last wrapped stitch. It's harder to see on the purl side. On the knit side you can see the wrap around it, but on the purl side it's harder to see. But I am 4 stitches before the last wrap stitch. You can see it better because of the little gap there, I think. So I'll do another short row on the purl side, slip the stitch purlwise, move the yarn, slip the stitch, and I will need to move the yarn, whether I move it as I'm turning or beforehand or after, it doesn't matter. But the yarn needs to go to the back, so I'm going to knit, and I will just snug that up a little bit. So I'll knit a stitch and then snug it up a little bit more. And now I want to knit, not that many actually now because my rows are getting so short. Here was the last wrap stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4 before that. So I've got to knit 2, 4, 6, 7 more. So I'll do one more on the right side. So that's stitch, yarn, stitch. I'll turn my work now. Oh, it's a little bit awkward. And you can see there's the wrap. And I'll need to move the yarn to the front to purl. So I'm going to purl one, snug it up a little bit, and then 1, 2, 3, and I think I'm already at 4 stitches before the last wrap stitch. So there's the last wrap stitch, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'll move the stitch, move the yarn, move the stitch. Stitches are always getting slipped purlwise so that you're not changing the orientation. And then I'll turn my work. Now I'm up to resolving them. I'm going to resolve them on the knit side first because I'm about to knit here. I'm going to knit all the way to the end of the row, and it's called resolving them. It's where you pick up the wrap and knit it with the wrapped stitch to help hide the wrap, and wrap will move to the back. And it helps to hide this gap here so you don't end up with a hole in your knitting. So I'm going to knit the first stitch, snug it up a little bit. Now I knit until I get to the wrap, but not including the wrap stitch. So I'll knit 2 more. Now this first one I'm going to do without the variation, and then the next 2 I'll do with the variation, so you can see the slight difference. Without the variation, you just you insert the right needle. I'm going to knit this stitch, but I'm going to insert the needle into the wrap first and then into the stitch. So you can see I've got 2 loops on the right needle, and I'm going to wrap the yarn around and pull through both of them, similar to knit 2 together in the way it looks, and take it off. And you can see that the wrap is there on the back. And so what it does is it sort of elongates this stitch, and you have this wrap looped around on the back. With the next one I'll do the slight variation, the next 2 I'll do the slight variation. So I'm going to insert the needle in to the wrap, then into the stitch, and I would just wrap around and knit if I was doing it without the variation. But what I'll do is I'll take that left needle out and then insert it into both and put it back on the left needle and take that wrap, sort of just release it from it so it's not locked in. Before it was kind of locked in as I actually knit it. By moving it back to the left needle, now it's like 2 separate loops and the wrap is completely on the back, and then I'll just knit those 2 together. And it just moves the wrap stitch to the back and it gives a slightly neater effect, as you can see. And I'll show the swatch again. It gives a slightly neater effect. So I'll do to the last one. So I've knit to the wrap stitch. If I was just going to resolve it simply, I would just insert the needle into the wrap and then into the stitch and just knit them together right now. But I'm going to take that left needle out and then put it back into both of them and just release that wrap from the stitch and then knit those 2 together. And it will just create a slightly neater look on this side. I don't think there's a big difference, to be honest, but I have noticed with my swatch it's slightly better. You can see that here are the wraps on the back. They're not, I mean, when you block it, it definitely improves a little bit, but you definitely can see them on the wrong side. So my favourite method is the German short rows, which I will do a video on as well. There really isn't, it's quite invisible from the wrong side. You can always slightly see it because you do have more rows. That's the whole thing about short rows, is you have, here I've got a whole bunch of ridges and here I don't. So at some point, you know, you've got more here than you do here. But I think it actually, the German short rows is one of my favourites for hiding. Or, I mean, it depends on what I'm actually working on, the situation. But yeah, I quite like the German short rows, so I'll do a video on that one as well. Okay, so now I've got to resolve these purl ones. So I'm going to purl across. I've already resolved these ones here, but I need to purl across to the ones on the other end. Okay, I'm slowing down a little bit because I can see where the wrap is. It's here where there's a bit of a gap. So I've got one more, and now resolving the pearls a little bit trickier because the wrap you can see better from the right side than you can from the wrong side, and I actually need to pick it up from the right side. So I sort of turn my work so it's, instead of looking at it like this, I turn it like that and I insert the right needle into the wrap and put it on the left needle. I'll do that again because I think my hands are off camera then. So there's the wrap. I insert the right needle into the wrap from the right side and lift it and put it on the needle. And then I purl those 2 together. And that brings the wrap to the wrong side. There is a slight variation on that one as well. I'll show you in the next one. I don't think this one's as obvious because all it does is slightly move it. So you insert the needle into the wrap from the right side and pick it up and put it on. Just make sure you don't lose that one as well. And then actually move it over so that the wrap is behind this first stitch, and then purl those 2 together. I think it's going to fall that way anyway, but it will just look a little bit better if you move it completely. So let's insert, this is the last one. You can insert the right needle from the back side, sorry, from the knit side onto the needle, and then just move him all the way to the back because he's the wrap, he's the one you want to hide. and then purl it. And purl to the end. And so that's all of them have been resolved. And because it's on a cable, you can see how it's definitely shorter on the ends and higher, because you've got a lot more rows in here than you do on the ends here. There's lots of uses for short rows. You might be wanting to raise the back neckline. You might want to be inserting like a bust adjustment to make it a little bit larger on the bust area. You could be using it for coming down on the sleeves. There's a lot of applications. Wrap and turn is just one method for doing it. I'm going to do a video on Japanese short rows and another one on German short rows. But this one's wrap and turn, which is sort of the most common one for patterns, and it's good to see how to do it. But you can definitely see here are the pearl ones that I just did. You can see this sort of loop, which is the wrap. I think Japanese short rows still have these loops, but the loops are slightly smaller just because of the way you do the short rows. And then German short rows, you just don't have this loop at all.